Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall?
Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
GB News is the home of free speech. We were created to champion it, and we deliver it day in, day out.
Free speech allows us all to explore and debate openly the issues most important to us, our families, and of course, the British people.
Having challenging conversations to enlighten each other.
Which is why we hear all sides of the argument.
We are the People's Channel.
We will always stand by the freedom to express yourself.
On TV, radio and online.
This is GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good evening. The government says we're going to need new gas-fired power stations. Otherwise, the lights are going to go out. Gosh, who knew? The Home Affairs Select Committee hears today about a conveyor belt of people crossing the English Channel and converting to Christianity so that they can stay. It's a level of abuse that is almost unbelievable. And a backbench Conservative Member of Parliament suggests that the work-shy, those that have refused 3 jobs, should be conscripted and put into the army for 2 years. Well, it's an idea, but does it have any chance of flying at all? Well, before all of that, let's get the news with Sophia Wensler.
Nigel, thank you. It's 7 o'clock. I'm Sophia Wensler in the GB newsroom. Your top story this hour. A spokesman for the Prime Minister has said comments allegedly made by a Tory donor about Diane Abbott were racist and wrong, but he was rightly to apologise for causing offence. It comes as the police are understood to have been contacted over the Frank Hester's alleged remarks. The Conservative Party's biggest donor reportedly said Miss Abbott made him want to hate all black women and she should be shot. Mr Hester has now apologised and says he abhors racism. Miss Abbott, who's now an independent MP, described the comments as frightening and worrying. Lee Anderson made his first appearance in the Commons this afternoon since defecting to Reform UK. He took his seat on the opposition benches next to George Galloway. Mr Anderson was stripped of the Conservative whip last month after refusing to apologise for saying Islamists had got control of the London mayor. Children in England who identify as trans will no longer be prescribed puberty blockers. The government said it welcomed the landmark decision, which they say is in the best interests of children. Puberty blockers, which cause physical changes in young people, will now only be available to children as part of clinical research trials. In other news, social media influencer Andrew Tate insisted that he's innocent of the charges laid against him as he was released from custody in Romania this afternoon. A court in Bucharest ruled that he can be extradited back to the UK to face charges once his trial in Romania ends. He was arrested after lawyers representing 4 of his accusers told British police that he was planning to flee Romania, where he and his brother Tristan now live. They're accused of sexual offences and human trafficking, allegations they've both denied. Speaking after his release from custody, Andrew Tate said Western countries were run by Satanists.
I want to give absolute credit to Romanian justice for making the correct decision today. Unfortunately, I don't think many people in Romania understand, but in the West, in the countries that are owned by the Satanists, when you get to a certain level of fame, you either put on a dress or you go to jail, and I'm happy to make my choice, which is jail every single time. My soul is not for sale, neither are my principles. We are innocent men. No, we're very innocent men, and in time, everybody's going to see that, and we're very excited to finish this judicial process and clear our names.
And new gas power plants will be built to protect Britain's energy security, despite concerns over the potential impact on climate change. The government says the new stations are needed to avert what ministers described as genuine prospects of blackouts and provide a backup for the growing electric economy. It's understood they'll replace existing facilities, many of which are old and due to be retired. The Prime Minister insists the UK's net zero plan is still on track, but says it must be met in a sustainable way. And for the latest story, sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts. Now it's back to Nigel.
The government is very proud of the fact that we have cut our CO2 emissions more than any other country in the world. They're down by almost 50% since 1990. In fact, some claim that our CO2 emissions are now the lowest they've been since the late industrial revolution. But of course, all of that has come at a massive cost. We've lost huge chunks of our manufacturing industry, and effectively what we've done is we've exported the CO2 emissions to other countries who manufacture goods they now sell to us. But the other side of the equation, of course, is energy. So we wake up today to the news that the government is going to need to build a significant number of new gas-fired power stations. Otherwise, our reliance on wind and solar could mean the lights going out. Well, who knew? I wonder, have you ever heard that before on this programme? Well, I tell you what, if you've seen me chatting with Clive Moffat, former government energy advisor on energy security, you'd have heard it a dozen times. Well, Clive, welcome back to the programme.
Thank you.
So just looking at all of this, and I read some of the figures that electricity usage is due to rise by 50% between now and 35 as we move to more EVs. Whether we do or don't is a separate issue. That the amount of wind energy we've got under this government's plans has to triple by 2035. And yet, of course, as you've said all along, over-reliance on renewables doesn't always work, does it?
No, it doesn't. I think today's announcement is long overdue and is a recognition, finally, that natural gas has a critical role to play in the provision of both heat and power in the foreseeable future. And the government have been forced into that situation by the stark realities of the fact that the planned increase in offshore wind will not materialise from 15 gigawatt to 50 gigawatt by 2035. And that the nuclear provision of power, which is 15%, will decline to 6% as the retirement of the existing fleet goes underway, and that Hinkley will be delayed even further if it ever happens.
That's the point, isn't it? Even if we say, right, that's it, we're going nuclear, we're really going to do it, by 2035, none of this would be on stream, would it?
No. I think it's becoming increasingly apparent to government that that target, the minister was at pains today to say this hasn't distracted us from our net zero target, but reality it has. It means it is, in effect, a cancellation of the intention to decarbonise the electricity system by 2035. And that it is not possible. It's neither feasible nor is it affordable. Labour's target of 2030...
I was going to come to that. So Labour are promising to decarbonise the electricity market by 2030.
Yeah.
Is that simply impossible?
G&B Union, who used to be one of the founder members of my energy security group in 2017, have said that it's impossible. And there is a distinct difference of opinion within the Labour Party about what exactly can be done by 2030 and what can't be done. We are short of detail, Nigel.
We're short of detail, but here's the funny thing, Clive. You know, we have two parties, one in government, one in opposition. At least that's what we used to call it. 120-odd points ahead in the polls and looking likely to win the next election. And yet, actually, other than the timelines of 2030 or 2035, you correct me if I'm wrong, please, but it seems to me their stance is almost identical.
Yes. I can't see at the moment, and I've been heavily involved in it in the last, certainly in the last 3 months. I've written briefing papers both for government and also for the Select Committee, which has both representatives from both sides. Yeah. And everybody in principle agrees with me that there's a case for actually investigating more closely whether there is feasibility and affordability associated with those targets. But I feel there's been a conspiracy of silence descended upon us in the case of this net zero target, in that both parties don't want to be seen to be in public, to be contradicting the fact that it might not be achievable in the timescales prescribed, and that there's also a silence about exactly what the costs will be.
And who will pay those costs.
Correct.
Which ultimately always has to be the taxpayer, doesn't it?
Yeah, and I think that we're talking here about the only way it can be funded. I mean, the fact that Labour basically rescinded its objective to spend £28 billion on green technologies is a drop in the ocean, Nigel, compared to the actual cost of decarbonising the electricity system. And yet Labour maintained the latter target and gave up the first target. But very few of them in the main media picked up on the fact that they're still persisting with the idea they can achieve the 2030. And the Tories are basically saying that they can achieve the 2035. There is seriously 3 issues why this isn't going to happen. One, there will not be enough wind capacity. They can't get from 15 gig to 50 gig by 2035 or 2030. It's simply not going to happen. No. Even if you give them, as they did last week, give offshore developers an extra £1 billion.
More subsidy.
In contract payments, guarantee payments. Even if you did achieve that target of capacity for offshore wind, you've still got the intermittency problem. Whereas we've got 30 gigawatt of wind at the moment, but there are times when it's only operating 4% of the time in terms of contributing. So you have that, if you like, makeup to be made up. The nuclear issue is again something which people don't want to get into the detail on, but it's clearly not going to happen.
But both parties agree in principle.
Exactly.
Now, Ofgem, the regulator, I know you've criticised them quite a lot in the past.
Indeed.
They did yesterday, actually, for the first time, say realistically we have to be careful about the cost being pushed onto consumers.
It's beginning to dawn on Ofgem, finally, that in fact there will be... It's interesting that the price of gas has fallen from £5 a therm in 2022 to 60p last week. And yet Ofgem is saying we're going to have steady and probably firmer electricity prices. And you have to ask yourself, well, what's driving that concern? Well, it's 2 reasons. One is that the Ofgem have increasingly, since the embarrassment of losing consumers billions of pounds in bailouts for suppliers, has gone out of its way to ensure that suppliers' balance sheets are liquid. And so you've had compensation for delayed payments, non-payments. And now increasingly, in the last press release that came out, a realisation from Ofgem that electricity prices will rise. And the root cause of that is decarbonisation costs and the levies that will have to be increased, both in terms of standing charges to fund networks and also bill usage charges to fund the £1 billion I was referring to fund offshore wind.
Clive Moffat, as ever, thank you for coming in. And folks, this is the point. We're not having a proper, full, honest debate on this vital issue. That's why I love Clive coming in. You can agree with Clive, disagree with Clive, but at least what we're doing here on GB News is trying to have a proper debate. And I'm absolutely certain that those targets of 2030 for Labour and 2035 for the Conservatives simply cannot be met. Now, there was a piece appeared in the Daily Express last night online, backed up by the Home Affairs Select Committee today. And I guess it was the Abdul Azidi alkali attack in Clapham that kind of brought this issue back to the fore. He was somebody, remember, who pretended to convert to Christianity having come into this country illegally and was then allowed to stay. But remarkably, one of the witnesses this morning, the Reverend Matthew Firth, described to the committee a conveyor belt and veritable industry of asylum baptisms. Well, GB News' Home and Security Editor Mark White joins me. Mark, I think it was the Clapham incident that got us talking about this again, but give us some idea of the scale of people who claim they're gay or claim they've converted to Christianity.
Well, we'd suspected for some time, Nigel, that this was a significant and growing problem. Remember, we spoke back in 2021 at the time when Emad al-Salween, the suicide bomber who tried to blow up the Liverpool Maternity Hospital, luckily only killed himself in that particular bombing. But remember, he had also applied and become a Christian in an effort to try to enhance his ability to stay in the country through the various attempts he made to try and stay in the UK. And of course, he was allowed to stay, or they tried to get rid of him, but never did, right up until the moment he blew that device up outside this hospital. And then just very recently, we've got the Bibby Stockholm barge with reports that 40 of the residents there, all asylum seekers, have tried, are currently attempting to convert to Christianity as well. So we understood it to be a significant and growing problem. Today we've heard from a member of the clergy who was there at a parish in Darlington for 2 years, and he saw this up close. He said that every few weeks, 6 to 7 young asylum seekers were taken to his church by someone he described as a fixer to try to get the church to convert them to baptism. He obviously smelt a rat. He said that what he did then was to try to intervene, to try to halt this process. This is what he told the Home Affairs Committee.
I honoured the baptisms that were all the baptism requests that were already in the system, but then you spot a pattern, and then you think, hang on, there's something going on here, and then you try to press a pause button, which is to make sure that people are requested to come to church and start getting involved and attending church regularly, events and so on, and that was the thing that kind of made the numbers fall off a cliff in a sense, because those people kind of melted away really.
Well, the committee also heard from some other leading figures within the Christian church and the Christian faith in the UK today, including the Bishop of Chelmsford. Now, the good bishop tried to suggest that if there was any kind of increase in the number of asylum seekers who were trying to claim or convert to Christianity, then perhaps it was down to what she described as the increasingly hostile environment for asylum seekers, and that the church, in contrast to that, offered a warm welcome. But she said in her answer to the committee that she didn't recognise this claim by the Reverend Firth of a conveyor belt of conversions to Christianity. This is what she said.
You know, our churches respond to local need, however it presents itself. That's a totally separate issue to saying that we are kind of quickly and easily and freely baptising large numbers in order to scam the asylum process. I think that the notion that the Church of England is currently being a conveyor belt for baptisms in order for people to gain their asylum status, I don't recognise that comment.
And Nigel, as shocking as the evidence was from Reverend Firth in terms of what he encountered during his time at that parish church in Darlington, I think for me one of the biggest surprises of the afternoon was the admission from the Immigration Minister, Tom Pursglove, who was also giving evidence to this committee, that the Home Office has no idea how many asylum seekers have ever converted to Christianity or currently have converted to Christianity. This is what he told the committee.
We are actively working to improve the data set that we have around this issue. So one of the challenges is that the legacy IT systems that we have been working on do not capture data in this area very effectively. The Home Secretary and I have been very clear in asking officials that we want to see greater itemised data in that area, and we are currently working through publication around that. And I think that you're absolutely right to touch on the data point. I think all of us want to see an improvement in terms of the quality of data that we have around decision making in the asylum space.
So they claim that legacy issues mean that they can't really give us any indication of how many past asylum seekers have converted to Christianity. But we know that there are still, at least 130,000 asylum seekers in the system waiting on a decision. Surely the Home Office can, as a matter of urgency, check and determine how many of those asylum seekers have switched from the faith of Islam to Christianity.
Mark White, thank you very much indeed for that. And I have to say, folks, I don't know how you feel at home watching that or listening in your cars, but what a complete and utter joke. The Minister hasn't got a clue. The Home Office haven't got a clue. They've no statistics whatsoever. And even when we get somebody coming forward, a priest coming forward and explaining how this conveyor belt works, we get some naive bishop from Essex on, who doesn't recognise it, doesn't understand it. And it is the naivety, not just of the Church of England, it's happened in the Baptist Church and in some cases in the Catholic Church as well. Don't they understand that in the religion of Islam, leaving it to join Christianity is called apostasy? And it's considered to be a terrible, terrible sin. I would bet very, very few of these so-called conversions are genuine. Very, very few indeed. In a moment, yet another new plan to release prisoners early. But does any of this actually work and make our streets safer?
Headliners. Tomorrow's papers tonight. Every night from 11 p.m.
Is a debate on gender really a far-right issue?
Far right. I'm so bored of that phrase, you know what I mean? Like, anyone who talks about, anyone who acknowledges that there are two sexes is suddenly far right, because that's what Hitler and Mussolini were all about. This question from Shirley is, of course, about Labour. They've been accused of being undemocratic because they pressured a pub into cancelling a debate, and this debate features Kelly J. Keane, who's been on this show a couple of times, and she's a campaigner, and she was just on the panel, and then they got a letter saying that they couldn't do it because Kelly J. Keane apparently attracts far-right groups. Now, they've tried this trick before, but because some awful, ghastly neo-Nazi types turned up near to an event that she was holding in Australia, they kind of tried to blame that on her and suggest that the two were the same thing. They weren't. That was an opportunistic group turning up to... They're not... Neo-Nazis aren't pro-feminist. They're not pro an event called Let Women Speak. That's just ridiculous.
New Zealand's TV blurred her touching her zip because they said that her touching her zip was a far-right dog whistle because she's making that symbol.
Yeah, but she wasn't making the symbol, she was just adjusting her zip.
Yeah, and also, this isn't a far-right symbol.
I mean, that was incredible because she obviously wasn't making that symbol anyway. She was just adjusting her top. But this New Zealand news channel blurred out the hand so that they could pretend that it was some horrible, ghastly... Yeah. I mean, this is stuff, isn't it?
She's talked about having voted Labour in the past. She's so not far-right.
But also, even if she were right-wing, which she isn't, why would they be banning a panel where there's a discussion about one of the most important issues of our day? What are Labour playing at here?
They're anti-democratic, aren't they? They're just kind of playing whack-a-mole with things they don't like. I think maybe I'll write to the pub and say I do want to see Kelly J. Keane there.
Yeah, but they won't listen to you
well,
if
no,
you say that, will they?
Because
you've got the unfashionable opinion, Chris.
Well, I'm the unfashionable workplace.
From 10 a.m. every Saturday, we want to make you think and we want to make you laugh.
So we will give you all the top stories.
Now we start with a story that has shocked the nation this week.
But we're also going to make it light and fun and bring some entertainment in to make your Saturday morning nice and restful.
Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
You would have thought with an exploding population and therefore, logically, more criminals, that the answer would be to invest and build more prisons. But no. And this story is one we've heard before, but it's back again. The idea that prisoners could be released up to 2 months early to prevent overcrowding. I wonder, does that actually make any sense at all? Well, I'm going to ask Mark Fairhurst, National Chairman of the Prison Officers Association. Mark, I know and understand the conditions in many of our prisons are truly awful. I'm also told by prison officers that morale in your service is perhaps not as good as it could be. But tell me, does it really make sense to keep reducing sentences just because we haven't got enough prison places?
Well, this is a situation, Nigel, that was both predictable and preventable. Their own advisors 3 years ago told them that they didn't have enough spaces to satisfy demand in the future. So they could have reacted years ago to prevent this. Since this government came to power, they've closed over 20 public sector jails and built only 6. So it's entirely on their watch that this crisis is now a tipping point. And some people have said by Easter will be full. Well, I think that's really optimistic. By the end of next week, the adult closed male estate will have no spaces left.
And no spaces left, overcrowded prisons, tends to mean prisoners loitering for long periods of time, not being given constructive things to do. And we had Anne Widdecombe in the other week, former prisons minister, and she said that inactive prisoners are less likely to reform, to learn something, and to go back out as better members of society.
Well, that's correct. A prime example is Wandsworth Prison, which is built to hold just over 970 prisoners, which is currently housing over 1,600. So a prison that's built to house 900, built to house 900 prisoners with activity spaces to cater for them. When you've got nearly double that, what hope is there for rehabilitation? And prisoners get frustrated, and who bears the brunt of their frustrations and anger and boredom? The staff on the front line. So it is a boiling point. It is a tipping point. It is something that the government need to put right. And they need to look at not only sentencing policy, but freeing up spaces for people who really could be released back into society. So, for example, we currently have about 3,000 prisoners serving IPP sentences, some who are 10 and 15 years over their tariff, their release date. They're not all a danger to society. Why can't we free up spaces there and release some of them, maybe on a home detention curfew type thing with an ankle tag? You know, we've got a lot of people who are serving sentences for ridiculous things like non-payment of fines or not paying your TV licence. Could we not give them a community sentence? It's ridiculous. That's £47,000 a year, Nigel, to keep someone in prison. And we're sending them to prison for not paying fines or not buying a TV licence.
Yeah, no, I agree with that completely. And as far as the BBC tax is concerned, it's mostly women, of course, who finish up in prison for this and not men. And I agree with you. There are areas like that that are clearly ridiculous. But is there not also, Mark Fairhurst, an argument that says we actually need to build newer, modern prisons?
Well, the problem with building new, modern prisons is when you build a prison, you always fill it. And 9 times out of 10, the majority of prisons go to the private sector to run for profit. Now, we disagree with that. We've got members in the private sector and we look after them the best we can. And we have positive relationships with the private sector. But if the state incarcerates someone, the state should be responsible to look after them. Can we not look at sentencing policy? Can we not do things better? It's good that Alex Chalk, who I've got sympathy for, by the way, he inherited this mess. He didn't create it. It's good that he said there's a presumption on sentences of 12 months or less, where he's encouraging judges not to put people into prison who are sentenced to 12 months. But the public have got to be confident that they are serving robust community sentences with the correct supervision. And as you know, Nigel, it's not just the prison service which is under pressure. It's the probation service which are overworked and understaffed as well. And we're relying on them now to not only supervise these new releases in our communities, but relying on them to process the release and do the risk assessments.
Yeah.
So I'm hoping
Yeah.
it's not a rush job and the public is not put at risk.
Well, Mark Fairhurst, thank you for giving us your frank views. And, you know, I completely understand everything Mark is saying, but also remember, folks, we're even decriminalising, effectively, things like shoplifting. We have a problem. Now, staying with the law and order theme, Andrew and Christian Tate, who, of course, have been in Romania, may well now be extradited to the UK on charges of rape and human trafficking. And this has all happened because the British government has issued to Romania a European arrest warrant. Karen Todner, human rights and extradition lawyer, joins me. Karen, I'm just a bit confused about one thing. The European arrest warrant came through our membership of the European Union, so clearly we're still part of quite a lot of EU architecture.
This warrant's actually issued under the Trade and Cooperation Agreement, which is still part of the Extradition Act, but it's not actually a European arrest warrant under the old system. But the reality is, extradition has really not changed very much since Brexit.
OK, I mean, extradition, of course, existed with some countries going back for many, many years. So tell us what it actually means in practical terms. The British government say, we want these guys to come back to the UK to face charges, although they also face charges, don't they, in Romania as well. I mean, is it now, because it was part of our Brexit agreement, is it now law that the Romanians have to do this, or do they have the choice as to what to do?
Essentially, it's law. There's very little that can be done to object to an extradition request to the United Kingdom. Despite what was been said earlier, our present conditions in Europe are considered to be very good. Our judicial system is considered to be very good. I think the thing to remember about this particular matter today is that the Tate brothers will not be coming back to the UK anytime soon. The domestic proceedings in Romania take precedent, and they will have to be completely exhausted before any extradition will take place.
OK, so that's really what matters. So they will have to go through and face the charges they're facing in Romania first. So, frankly, the chances of them coming back to the United Kingdom, realistically, it's going to be a year or two, isn't it?
If not more. If they're convicted in Romania and they serve sentences there, they won't be extradited until after the conclusion of those sentences. So there's a long time to go yet.
Yeah, and tell me, you know, in terms of extraditions, what sort of numbers are we talking about in terms of people, you know, people that we want to get back in this country every year? How successful are we at bringing people back from all around the world?
We don't actually make that many requests compared to other countries. Poland, for example, makes requests probably 5 a day to us, and Romania the same, Bulgaria. But we actually make very few, but in comparison, but when we do make them, we're relatively successful.
Yeah, and of course the most controversial of all are the extraditions to America, where as a result of that treaty that Mr. Blair signed, you know, without the production of any prima facie evidence of any kind in court, you know, a British businessman or woman could be extradited to America. I mean, surely within your industry, there must be people who see how grossly wrong and unfair that is. Is there no prospect of reform of the American treaty?
Well, after the Gary McKinnon case, which I did in 2012, Theresa May did actually make some changes to the Extradition Act. But nevertheless, it's still a very one-sided and unfair treaty that we have with America. And I lobby all the time for changes for it, but they're not forthcoming. No, well, you and I agree on that point 100%. Thank you for explaining the situation in which the Tates find themselves. Thank you. Well, in a moment, we're going to have a big debate about EVs because a report out says, no. Whatever numbers the manufacturers tell you, they don't really go that far. Let's debate EVs. What is their future? Are they really up to scratch? All of that in just a moment.
Good evening. Here's your latest GB News weather update brought to you by the Met Office. whilst in the south-southeast of the UK it is actually going to turn largely dry as we go into Wednesday. It's a different story towards the north and west. That's because we have a frontal system here that is eventually going to start to edge back southeastwards as we go through the night. That is going to bring some heavy, persistent rain across much of Scotland, Northern Ireland, and then later into northern England and Wales as we go through the early hours of tomorrow. Further south and east across the rest of England and Wales, a drier picture, but a cloudy one and a windy story for all, and so temperatures really aren't going to drop much, many places staying in double figures. As we go through tomorrow itself then, this band of rain does gradually push its way a little bit further south and eastwards, but doesn't make much progress, so it is going to linger and bring quite a bit of rain across northern England and some parts of North Wales too. A drier story further south, the limited bright or sunny spells here, but temperatures rising to highs of around 15 Celsius. Windy for most of us, but the strongest winds will be across northwest Scotland where there's the risk of gales, but also some sunshine. As we go into Thursday, and again staying mostly dry towards the southeast, but elsewhere there'll be quite a bit of rain around, outbreaks of rain feeding up from the southwest across many places, with a band of more persistent rain across Northern Ireland and Scotland pushing northwards. Showers to come as we go through Friday. Some of them could be heavy, and then Saturday's likely to turn wet again. I'll see you again soon. Bye-bye.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria DiPiero, bringing you
PMQ's live here on GB News. Every Wednesday we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions when Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer go head-to-head in the House of Commons.
We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, every Sunday at 9:30 when I'll be interviewing the key players in British politics and taking them to task.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial.
With an upcoming election looming over Westminster, now is the time for clear, honest answers.
I agree.
And that's precisely what I'll get.
Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's election channel.
We've been there before, we're here again. It's the great EV debate. Are they really up to scratch? Well, let's start with a critical case, and it's Steve Huntingford, who joins me down the line, the editor of What Car, who has produced a report suggesting that the mileages the manufacturers tell me we can get from a full charge are not quite correct. Steve, please make your case.
Good evening. Yes, well, it's not so much the figures that the manufacturers claim, it's the figures that the official figures claim. So basically the manufacturer figures, the figures that are published in brochures, are figures that they are obliged to publish. They have no choice. Those results are tested to a worldwide standard, but unfortunately that worldwide standard isn't very realistic, because, or at least it's not very realistic for all weather conditions. It's done in quite relatively light driving, and it's done in summer weather conditions. Now, all batteries, unfortunately, whether it's your phone, your computer, or your car, are less efficient in cold weather. And so what we're saying is we think it's the test should better reflect the optimum what you get in summer, but you also need a winter figure so that when people are choosing their electric cars or choosing whether or not they want to go electric, whether it suits them, so they have some realistic idea of what that car is going to be capable of.
And you're saying that the disappointment level can be up to 30% of the number that's given?
Yes, indeed. So we tested 12 current electric cars, ran them till they were basically ran them from fully charged till they completely ran out of energy on a private test track. And what we found is that none of them got within 20% of their official figures, and some of them were almost 40% away.
OK, and just sort of remind me, if I'm going up the M1 tonight and I need to stop and charge my EV, provided I can find a free stand, what's that going to cost me compared to putting unleaded in?
Well, that is the problem. If you are relying on public charging, it often will be more expensive than it'd be more expensive than if you're running a petrol car. However, the counterpoint to that is that most people who run an electric car will do the majority of their charging at home. If you can charge at home overnight, if you can get yourself a cheap overnight tariff, then electric cars still can make a lot of sense. We're not saying that electric cars don't make sense. What we're saying is you have to think about how you're going to use the car. If you can't charge at home and you're going to spend all your time charging on the motorway, yes, it's going to cost you more than running a petrol car. If you can charge at home and you're not regularly going to use public charging, then actually you will save money.
Yeah, and I mean, you know, the idea that, you know, there'll be no more manufacture of petrol and diesel cars, and we've slipped that date by 5 years. But if you live on a fourth floor flat, it's quite difficult to charge an EV, isn't it?
That is the problem. So, yeah, at the moment, probably about 70% of people in this country can charge an EV at home. And though for those people, an EV can make a lot of sense, unless they're doing a lot of high mileages and they're still relying quite heavily on the public charging network, because then the costs can rack up. But actually, for the vast majority of those people who can charge at home, there is the potential to save a lot of money. But yes, the problem at the moment is the charging infrastructure is not there for 100% of people to do it. So to ask 100% of people to go electric until we've got that charging infrastructure right,
can't be done.
Until we've got the cost right, that's the problem.
Steve Huntingford, thank you. Well, Sam Clark is Chief Vehicle Officer for GridServe, a charge point operator, and he holds the Guinness World Record for the longest distance ever driven in an electric car on a single charge. Sam, you know, I mean, I think in many ways Steve gave a balance for you of the upside and downside of electric vehicles. You're an enthusiast, but, you know, here's the problem. And on Friday, I live in Kent, on Friday, I had to drive down to Tiverton and back. I was quite comfortable on a tank of diesel to do that. If I'd had an EV, I'd have had to stop twice, wouldn't I?
Well, I can give you another example, Nigel, if you like. That's mine tonight, this evening. You know, I was kindly invited to the show, and I left house not expecting to come here today. To be honest.
We're very pleased to see you.
Thank you for the invitation. But you know, my car wasn't full when I left. I stopped at Reading Services. A quick read of the report that Steve's just articulated. Put a couple of 100 miles in my car while doing it, and then here I am, perfectly comfortable.
And how long did you stop in Reading for?
About 20 minutes.
I haven't got time for that. I'm a busy person.
Well, we've all got to stop and refresh and recharge ourselves as well. And there is an element of planning that is required when you drive EVs, but then so too is with petrol vehicles. So I have very much got the volition now on my daily routes that I don't stop to charge. I charge because I've stopped. So when I'm travelling around the country, as I do in an EV and have done for many, many years, I bake in that lifestyle into what I'm doing. So I'm doing other things at the same time. I'm not stood there like, unfortunately, you will be, filling up with diesel. I'll be checking my emails, using facilities, grabbing a coffee, eating some lunch, and charging simultaneously.
That's all well and good. I mean, you know, I'm driving an XC60 Volvo, you know, mid-range, size-wise. I can probably get 500 miles to a tank of diesel. What am I going to get if I go electric?
Well, it's interesting what Steve said about his report. I mean, again, using my own example, my vehicle does around 300 miles. Now, in the summertime, that can be as high as 320. In the winter, maybe 280, 290. But the discrepancy is not huge. So it's very easy, and often the way that we pick up on the worst case scenarios of these tests. And I think the tests that were done with What Car are very thorough. You know, it's good testing in a vast range of vehicles. But we can't just focus on the ones that did the worst. We've got to focus on the ones that did the best. And there are vehicles out there that are actually overperforming against their state.
Well, he's doing a mean across 14 different models.
Yes, with respect, you highlighted the worst case scenario rather than...
No, I didn't highlight anything. I'm just here to have a debate. Now they weigh an awful lot, these cars. They're going to give us a lot more wear and tear on our roads. There's talk of particulate material being released from, you know, heavy weight on tyres. There's no feasible means of recycling the batteries. They're not that green, really, are they?
Oh, God, there's so many things wrong with those statements. For a start, there's an awful lot more particulates that come out of your exhaust pipe than there does from the brake ducts of an electric vehicle, especially on the basis that you barely use the brakes on an electric vehicle anyway. The information that we've got from the industry as well demonstrates there isn't a huge amount of difference between tyre wear. And the vehicle weights, all vehicles are getting bigger and heavier. And part of the...
But these are a lot heavier.
Well, not hugely. I mean, there's a few vehicles that are north of 2.5 tonnes, but most of the vehicles are less than
that. So if I get a puncture living on the country lane that I do, what happens then?
In your diesel car?
No, in an electric car.
Well, what's the difference?
Well, because it takes an awful lot more to tow away. Changing a tyre at the roadside for an EV is not very easy, is it?
It makes no difference. I mean, the vehicle comparison will be the same.
All right. Sam Clark, evangelist for electric
but also
cars.
Practical and real as well.
No, look, if people want to buy electric cars, they can. I am not yet convinced. Doesn't mean I won't be, but I'm not yet convinced. But thank you for coming in, having that debate. My What the Farage moment today was the front page of a Times. Could not believe it. Probably in response to Lee Anderson, the front page of a Times is Boris to return to campaign in the red wall for Rishi Sunak. Well, one reason why he won't do it is he doesn't really like Rishi Sunak very much. The second reason he won't do it is there'd be nothing in it for him. And the third reason he won't do it is because the last time it was polled, 50% of those in the red wall who voted Boris in 2019 now had no confidence in him whatsoever. It isn't going to happen, folks. It's Conservative Central Office putting out a story to try and get rid of what they saw as bad news as their former deputy chairman left the party yesterday. In a moment, a backbench Tory Member of Parliament says that the work shy, those who won't accept the third job offer, should be put in the army for a couple of years. Well, I wonder, is that even possible and practical in 2024? We'll debate that in just a moment.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Now, I'm sure you have seen this video that went viral this week, and if you haven't, well, I think you're going to enjoy it. This is a firefighter leaning on a fence whilst watching a trapped driving instructor's car sink in 4 feet of floodwater. Looks very comfortable there, doesn't he? Just leaning against the fence.
Just chilling, just relaxing. Yeah, there were two. There were, in fact, 2 Essex fire and rescue crews, an ambulance and a police car parked near the sinking vehicle, but they wouldn't enter the water because they had to wait for specialist crews who were trained for the water depth.
Well, 2 people who weren't going to sit back and watch were these 2, Jack and Danielle Price, who took it upon themselves to rescue the submerged driver. And Danielle joins us now. Very good morning to you, Danielle, and you are a hero, an absolute hero. What happened in this video? Make sense of it for us.
So we were filming in the area for our YouTube channel, and we've seen the fire brigade come through. I was actually out at 5 o'clock in the morning with my husband, Jamie. We know it always happens there, as you can see, and it was clear. We've seen the fire brigade come through, we've followed them, and they're just standing around as if nothing's happened. In the clip, it says he's fine, he's on his phone, and then sort of walked away. But what they failed to realise is when my partner actually opened the door, as you can hear, he's on the phone to the emergency crew in panic, thinking he's going to sink. So we could not just sit there and watch. He's absolutely terrified.
Yeah, poor bloke. Well done, you. Do you reckon this is health and safety gone mad?
It is, because although I do sympathise with them, they are so red-taped, but surely sort of common sense has to kick in as open the door.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall?
Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
Well, in some ways, it's a bit of a cliche, isn't it? Country's gone to the dogs, bring back national service. Well, something like that is being suggested by Richard Drax, Conservative Member of Parliament for South Dorset, and, of course, a man who serves on the Defence Select Committee. And Richard Drax joins me in the studio. Now, it's not national service as such that you're advocating. What is it you're saying?
I'm just saying that there would be some cases, particularly amongst the young, of course, who are listless, rudderless, often from challenging backgrounds, who can't work, won't work, and I'm suggesting that they are put into an institution like the armed forces where they are within an infrastructure where they can learn about camaraderie, about friendship, about leadership, and about service, which I'm afraid to say many people don't seem to understand, that you serve your country, you don't take from your country. And I think the evidence from the Office of National Statistics shows that this figure is rising. And I'm a Conservative. I do not like the state interfering where it shouldn't. But in some cases, I'm not saying everyone should be called up and put into the armed forces.
No,
I'm not saying that.
I mean, one of the problems here, Richard, of course, is the number of people. I mean, this isn't about the unemployed, it's about the work shy, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
It's about those that refuse 3 jobs and, of course, are not on the disability register for mental health or stress or whatever it may be.
Yeah.
You know, you might find, if you try and do this, that an even larger number claim they've got an illness of some kind and try and get out of it.
Well, I think that would be challenged, of course. I mean, they have to be seen, and people have to go and see them and say, "Are you ill?" and checked. Well, I don't think we just can't go on allowing a generation to fall through the employment hole. That's not going to lead to their happiness in the future, not going to lead to the country's happiness. And unfortunately, the welfare bill is likely to get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger as more people fall into this spiral of despair.
I know. And, of course, one of the ways, perhaps, is to make work genuinely pay by lifting the rate at which people start paying tax, and that would help. I mean, Richard, you know, this idea that you're putting out there, I mean, people can say, Drax is an old fogey. This is the sort of thing people talked about back in the 1950s. Is it realistic in 2024? And can you get any support for the idea?
I think it is realistic. I doubt I get support. I think the Prime Minister's already slapped down, if I recall, the head of the Army, who suggested something similar to this.
Yes.
Mind you, that was joining the Army. I'm saying that these young could join any institution.
Yeah, so not just the Army.
Not just the Armed Forces, no.
So they could join perhaps the care sector or something else like that?
The care sector, the border sector, any sector which has an infrastructure within which they can be guided, nurtured and achieve their aspiration. Now, I trained young men for 2 years at the Guards Depot. When they arrived, in many cases, they came from very deprived backgrounds. 6 months later, their parents were saying to us on the Parside Square, "What have you done to my son?"
In a good way.
In a good way. In a good way. And these men, and in this case it was men, went on, and I went on to serve with them, and I was proud to serve with them. And in the event of a war, I would have been equally proud to die with them. They became the salt of the earth. And what's so sad, Nigel, is how small a thing it was that turned these men around.
Interesting. No, you've made the case for very strongly. Well, I'm joined down the line from Washington, D.C. by Elizabeth Braw, Senior Fellow at the Atlantic Council and author of Goodbye Globalisation. Now, Elizabeth, you know, Richard's made a very powerful case there that there are young, rudderless, listless people not doing themselves any good, not doing the country any good, and that something like this might just improve them and be a good thing for the nation.
The general premise is not a bad one, but why just take the workshop? Why not test everybody and select the most able and mentally, physically, and those people may well be the work shy that you just mentioned. But if it's just the work shy who are told to go and do national service, then it will be seen as a punishment. Turn it into a reward. So if everybody's tested, if you're good enough, you get to do national service.
So open it up to everybody, aged 18 or 19 or whatever it is, and they can sort of serve for a year and help their country in some way.
Don't allow everybody to serve. Assess them, test them, and select the best. That's what the Norwegians do. They assess every 18-year-old, and if you're one of the best, 17%, then you are selected for national service, which means even if you come from a disadvantaged, underprivileged background, even if you might have become work shy otherwise, if you have the right attitude and the right mental and physical skills, then you are selected, and it's the best possible entry you could have on your CV.
And what happens to everybody else?
they are like you and me, Nigel. They don't get to have that entry on their CV, and they have to get other good entries on their CV elsewhere. But the point is that this is the best, the most meritocratic system you can ever have. It's much better than being selected for university, because it really doesn't depend on your educational background. It depends on your attitude, your mentality, and the qualities that you may need in the armed forces. And that's why the armed forces get the soldiers they need, and many of them then choose to stay on for a professional career, and others then join the private sector and do well there.
Fascinating. Elizabeth Broad, I'd never heard that before. Utterly fascinating. Trouble with this Drax fellow, he's not radical enough. I mean, she's saying this ski. Wasn't that interesting, though?
Well, my wife's Norwegian, and that's exactly what they do.
Yeah.
You've got to think about the cost, of course. On that, they would be hugely expensive.
Yeah, and with our tiny army, we need to build the army up in size first before we can even do it.
Well, we certainly do that, but I have no doubt that for some, not for everybody, that this would be a huge benefit, and I think the nation would be hugely grateful, actually.
You're a very loyal Conservative, Richard, and you're there on the Defence Select Committee. Just how disappointed were you by the budget last week in terms of defence spending?
I mentioned it in my speech today, and I said I was very disappointed. I mean, we're told by the Secretary of State it's pre-war. We're spending 2% probably, just. And in my day, it was over 5%. In the 80s, and the kit's now more expensive, and the army's been as small as ever been since the Napoleonic days. So it's a crisis, and we have got to get a grip of this and start spending more money on our armed services.
I think you're right. I think many think you're right. Richard Drax, thank you very much indeed. Well, I'm joined by Sir Jacob Rees-Mogg, and that was really interesting, wasn't it, about the Norwegians and what they do and selecting them?
Absolutely fascinating.
I know Richard's married to a Norwegian. He knew that. I'd never heard that.
No, nor had I. No, but I thought it was a really interesting idea. Though I think the able people who she was talking about will get jobs anyway. And what you really need to do, and I'm actually going to be talking about this later, is the 1 in 4 people who are not in work, who aren't even looking for work, don't seem to care.
Absolutely.
And you've got to persuade them that they can't just live off everybody else. That's not fair on other taxpayers.
No, and you do wonder, don't you, at what point do the tax-paying, folk out there sort of rebel about this? I mean, I wonder who really knows the figures. I mean, you just said 1 in 4.
1 in 4, and that was even reported on the BBC.
Good Lord, extraordinary.
I know. A right-wing point on the BBC.
Well, I don't think about right-wing, it's about right and wrong, I think.
Yes.
And that's really the point. I think all this right-wing, left-wing thing's nonsense. So, Jacob, what can we expect after the news?
Well, the main thing I'm going to be talking about is that we have to indefinitely postpone net zero. That we're announcing more gas-powered electricity stations. We need that. We should actually have coal as well. Our electricity is more than double that of the US. It's 5.5 times that of the People's Republic of China and India. And this is crippling our industry, and it's making people cold and poor. Change.
But we've cut CO2 emissions more than any other Western country by de-industrialising. And they say that's a success. I don't really think it is. Well, that's it. Over and out from me. Back with you tomorrow evening at 7 o'clock. But first, let's have a look at the all-important weather with Alex Burkill.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Good evening. Here's your latest GB News weather update, brought to you by the Met Office. Whilst in the south-southeast of the UK, it is actually going to turn largely dry as we go into Wednesday. It's a different story towards the north and west. That's because we have a frontal system here that is eventually going to start to edge back southeastwards as we go through the night. That is going to bring some heavy, persistent rain across much of Scotland, Northern Ireland, and then later into northern England and Wales as we go through the early hours of tomorrow. Further south and east across the rest of England and Wales, a drier picture, but a cloudy one and a windy story for all, and so temperatures really aren't going to drop much, many places staying in double figures. As we go through tomorrow itself then, this band of rain does gradually push its way a little bit further south and eastwards, but doesn't make much progress, so it is going to linger and bring quite a bit of rain across northern England and some parts of North Wales too. A drier story further south, the limited bright or sunny spells here, but temperatures rising to highs of around 15 Celsius. Windy for most of us, but the strongest winds will be across northwest Scotland where there's the risk of gales, but also some sunshine. As we go into Thursday, and again staying mostly dry towards the southeast, but elsewhere there'll be quite a bit of rain around, outbreaks of rain feeding up from the southwest across many places, with a band of more persistent rain across Northern Ireland and Scotland pushing northwards. Showers to come as we go through Friday, some of them could be heavy, and then Saturday's likely to turn wet again. I'll see you again soon. Bye-bye.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Want to be a winner?
You've won £18,000.
I'm slipping it. I don't know what to say.
Enter our massive spring giveaway with 3 big seasonal prizes to be won. There's £12,345 in tax-free cash to give your finances a spring boost. We'll also send you on a shopping spree with £500 worth of vouchers to spend in the store of your choice. You'll also get a garden gadget package. For another chance to win the vouchers, the treats and £12,345 in tax-free cash, text GBWIN to 84902. Text costs £2 plus 1 standard network rate message. Or post your name and number to GB03 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on Friday the 29th of March. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Please check the closing time if watching or listening on demand. Good luck.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall?
Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, every Sunday at 9:30 when I'll be interviewing the key players in British politics and taking them to task.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial.
With an upcoming election looming over Westminster, now is the time for clear, honest answers.
I agree.
And that's precisely what I'll get.
Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's election channel.
GB News is the home of free speech. We were created to champion it, and we deliver it day in, day out.
Free speech allows us all to explore and debate openly the